These are supposed to be the best paints in the world, at least according to their producer. And today, I'm testing whether that's true, or if it's a goddamn lie. You see, this is the new paint range from Army Painter, and in one of their promotional videos, they made the following statement, and I quote, "Now, I know that people might not be ready for the best paint in the world, and I know for a fact that they might not have expected the Army Painter to do it." Unquote. And after hearing that, I knew that I gotta review them. So in this video, you'll see what makes these paints different, whether you should buy them, and if they are in fact the best paints in the world or not. But before that, you might be wondering, but why did they choose to replace their old range? Well, because it was dog shit. I've already made a comparison between different paint brands, and I am pretty sure that Army Painter was the worst one out there. You could still get something decent, but I totally felt like I have to work around my paints, rather than being in sync with them. And these are supposed to be much better, so what is it that makes them different? From what I have seen, the new Warpaints Fanatic promise better coverage, more vivid and saturated paints, with easier application. Now, actually, I don't really care about the following features, but I think that I should mention them because they might be useful for beginners. But I promise we'll get to painting soon enough. The first cool feature is that there are mixing bowls inside the dropper bottles. This is great because you don't have to put them in yourself, which is what I do with other paint brands. The second feature are the flexible triads. This means that you have a family of colors that you are using from the darkest to the lightest to get a gradient. This is cool and all, but what I liked even more is the idea of taking a color from a different triad and using it within a different color family. So, for example, instead of using dark blue for your blue gradients, you can use dark violet instead to have a more interesting gradient. However, you'll quickly realize that this doesn't always work, because different triads have too much variety in how light and dark the colors are. So, for example, if I wanted to make this red gradient more interesting, it seems like I could add pink between the Wyvern Fury and pure red, because on the color triad it occupies the correct position. However, this doesn't really make any sense, because this pink is quite obviously lighter than the red. So it has some limitations, but honestly, it's not a big deal. Now let's get to painting to see if you should buy them. However, I just want to share with you that unlike many other content creators, I didn't get these paints for free from the Army Painter. Because, obviously, they probably fucking hate me from my past critique. They're fucking dog shit. So I don't want to say that other reviews are biased, that might not be the case, but because I am not sponsored by any paint brand, I think that I can give you a fair perspective. Last time we painted as Quighopper Mini, so today I'm gonna do that as well. But because there are so many paints, I wanna test some on this Space Marine first. I tried to paint some gold non-metallic metal on this helmet. The paint behaved exactly as it should. However, I was missing some of those more saturated browns that are needed to make that gold really work. Unfortunately, this small paint set doesn't really have them. So I guess that this would be fixed by purchasing some other paints from them. So I can't really complain too much. And given that I am missing these paints, I didn't really put too much effort and I quickly moved to some blue paints. Funnily enough, there are like 10 paints that are in blue and teal family of colors, which is a bit too much if you ask me, because the set could certainly use more yellows, browns and reds. For the most part, the blues that I tried were pretty good, but they were a bit thicker than I am used to, which is just something that you have to keep in mind. Already, I can see that the paints I have used are miles better than the old paint range, and the standard layering works really well. Obviously, I am rushing a little bit here, and you'll see me put more effort into the squig once we get to it, but so far, everything looks good. On the other leg, I did pretty much the same thing, and still, I found that the paint application is really nice. One thing that I have noticed though is that some paints are a bit satin and other paints are very matte. This is not a big problem, but I usually appreciate consistency across the range. However, if you are varnishing your models, it really doesn't matter. So on the Space Marine, I would say that the only real problem was that I didn't have the access to the entire range to try some more browns for the helmet. But other than that, so far so good. And what about the squig? I replaced my parchment paper and loaded as many paints as I could, because after all, I wanna test as many as I can. Another thing that I've noticed, but that's not as obvious on camera, is that many paints have added white or grey into them. This is somewhat of a standard practice for all hobby paints, because that way you get better coverage. However, doing that for paints that are supposed to be saturated is kinda counterintuitive, because you lose that saturation. In this case, I've noticed this happening with the reds, for example, but it's nothing that would make them unusable, and most likely most people won't even notice it anyway. Still, the coverage is absolutely fantastic, and I can't say anything bad in this regard. Now, I don't really like using washes or dedicated shading products, so what I did instead is water down some black and purple and applied it as a shade to bring more definition to the model. This has worked really well, which is especially surprising given that some paints that are thinned to this consistency start breaking down. And this hasn't happened here. Moving on, I have found that this magenta and pink didn't cover as well as I would like them to, but it's not too bad, and at most I had to come back to apply it one more time. Any browns and other muddy or desaturated colors were exactly the opposite, and the coverage was exquisite. But again, it would be surprising if that wasn't the case. By the way, do you see that shit right here? Those are some really nice teeth, am I right? Well, what if I told you that you can see the entire painting process for them? And to do that, just join our community on Patreon. You'll see unedited footage, and also you can hang out in our Discord server. Link is in the description. Anyway, as I went forward, I didn't encounter any significant problems aside for that saturation thing. This is kinda understandable given that these are hobby paints and not an artist range, so the ease of use is more important than the pigment purity. Either way, this didn't really stop me from getting something that I really like. So going forward, I mixed in some orange and skin tones to highlight this angry bouncy boy. At some point, I think I got a bit overboard with it and made the squig too bright, but I really enjoyed the orange so much so I wanted to see how far can I push it. Jumping a bit forward, I also tried to paint some non-metallic metal, and I've used the standard layering and glazing approach. I really tried to come up with something noteworthy, but there wasn't anything that would stop me from getting the result I wanted. Certainly, I didn't have to fight the paints like I did with the old range. Now, Army Painter claims that they have increased the amount of pigment in the bottle by 300 to 700%. And I can certainly say that these paints cover so much better and are quite thick, but they don't make me go, wow, these are the best acrylics in the world. Rather, it makes me think, whoa, so you're saying that these have so much more pigment in them and they behave just like standard hobby paints? That means that the old range must have been absolute dog shit. So yeah, and actually, because these are so much thicker, it also means I have to get used to thinning them more. With that being said, I still have two problems that are not tied to this matter. First of all, why would you call your purple magenta and your magenta pink? What the fuck? And second, why would you name your black paint matte if it's satin? Just look, I was painting the rim of the base with black, which, by the way, is called rimming. Buy my merch? Please? And once it was dry, it was pretty similar to Abaddon Black, which is also satin. And you know what, I actually do like satin finish on blacks, but at least Abaddon Black is more durable. And yes, it was dry. But hey, this is such a small thing, it barely even matters. But I do love some proper good rimming. Oh, and by the way, you should definitely Google this miniature painting technique. Trust me on this one. So to answer the question whether you should buy it, well, it depends. I genuinely think that the paints are good, but personally I just prefer AK Interactive and Vallejo, because they are more consistent in finish and they are a bit thinner. And no, I am not sponsored by either of these. Some paints in this range are satin and some are matte, so it would be nice to have it all the same. I also don't think that you need that many desaturated colors in one box, but again, that's just me. So personally, if I did want to buy these paints, I think that I would just buy some of them and not the entire box or range. But if you did buy the entire range, I don't think it's a mistake and you are most likely not gonna regret it. However, both Vallejo and AK Interactive are cheaper, so I don't know, it's up to you. And are these the best paints in the world? No. And again, these are still pretty damn good. But like, there is no such thing as the best paint brand. Different paints have different features, and it's not like there is an universally best one. If you want saturated and vivid colors, you go to artist ranges or chimera paints, but if you want a good coverage and consistency, then you wanna get standard hobby paints. It's not like one is better than the others, and I am sure that some people will like this paint range much more than other ones, and you know what, that's completely fine. But to say that out of all the available ranges, this is the best one, yeah, I wouldn't go as far. But hey, I am not saying that they are lying, maybe it's just their opinion, but Jesus. Anyway, today I talked about just the Army Painter, but if you wanna see a comparison between all the major paint brands, you can see that in this video. And see you there.